It looks like we might be live. And I'm coming to you today from the Brunswick City Library, which is very exciting. And Moreland City Libraries would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people as the traditional custodians of the lands and waterways in the area now known as Moreland. We pay respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging, as well as to all First Nations communities who contribute to the life of this area. And I'm here today to talk to you about my book, Todd in Venice, which started out as a play, Todd in Venice, which was inspired by Thomas Mann's death in Venice. And the German title of that was Der Tod in Venedig. And I studied this at university, and because it's called Der Tod in Venedig, I was thinking, what if Todd, what if the young boy that the man is watching in the novel, what if he, instead of being this innocent young boy, what if he were a gay boy rampaging around Venice, getting up to all sorts of mischief? And from when I was first studying this back in late last century in Tasmania, I had this idea in my mind to write this play. And now I have, so that's pretty good. And this idea of taking the German, making it into something else, taking the word Tod, which means death, and making it into the name Todd, and then playing with that. There's a lot of wordplay in this. And some people are very scathing about puns. I'm being quite restrained in some ways because I do weed a lot of them out, but there are many plays on words within it. But the idea with transliterating from the German into English, I think this was also inspired by a book that I loved as a child called Nursery Rhymes, and it was purporting to be a French text examining early medieval poems. And there was one that went, tu bailles, et tu marques, et tu piques, which would mean in French, you yawn, and you mark, a typical effect. But then if you listen to it, it's actually tu marques, to buy a fat pig. It's actually English made to sound like French. So going in reverse, I got some things out of that to make the play Todd in Venice. But it's not all about wordplay. It's actually about, so you may have seen the Visconti film, Death in Venice of 1971. Very atmospheric. There are these long, long scenes with very slow music. And there's a guy, Gustav von Aschenbach, who's on holiday in Venice. And he sees this beautiful young boy who's very inspiring to him, who's actually Polish, Tadju. And in the film and in the book, there is a sort of a plague, an illness. We can relate to that, can't we? There's an illness spreading throughout Venice and throughout Europe. And he knows he ought to warn the young boy because the family are Polish and they're not reading the newspapers that are spreading this news. And yet, because he doesn't want to be parted from Tadju, he doesn't warn the family. And then himself, well, is that a spoiler though? It's quite an old book. You probably either read it or, anyway, he himself succumbs to the illness in Thomas Mann's book. But in my version, instead of Gustav von Aschenbach, we have Agnes. And Agnes has been living as a woman for many years, but she is now at the point when she's ready to have her gender reassignment surgery and become the woman that she's always been, really, within. And she's in Venice with her friend Michael. And Agnes, back in Tasmania, runs a kind of costume hire and wig hire place. And this character was also inspired by a woman that I met and hired costumes for an event called the Queen's Ball that was great fun in Tasmania. And of course, bearing in mind that cross-dressing was illegal in Tasmania until 2001, we used to love dressing up and running amok during the Queen's birthday holidays. So anyway, I went to meet this woman and I got some costumes and wigs and so on. But she's not really what Agnes is based on. But Agnes is possibly more deriving from a personal fascination or maybe some desire somewhere to transition or cross-dress or finding different personas within herself. But anyway, just to try and stick to the track of who the characters are in my version. So Agnes has arrived in Venice. She's got her friend Michael in tow. Agnes loves all the tacky masks and clowns and all those things. But she sees this young boy, just as Gustav von Aschenbach has done. And she is almost caught in her tracks thinking, can I leave that life behind? Can I leave that life of the beautiful young men behind? And not that she necessarily has to, but she's leaving her male self behind, her male youth. So Todd is somewhat a metaphor for that. And of course, her friend Michael becomes interested in Todd as well. But the problem in Venice, of course, is there's all this delicate 16th century architecture and the waters keep rising, they keep rising, and the Venice is at risk. There's always these, quite often there's this aqua alta, and when I was in Venice, there were many warnings about this, that it could become flooded. The whole thing risks sinking into the sea. And so this becomes something of a theme, a metaphor in my play, as well as in Thomas Mann's, this idea of the stagnant water, or the water that rises and that can threaten to overcome you if you succumb to emotion. But there are bridges all throughout Venice, and they're always walking over these bridges, and there's a friendship bridge that they're looking for that they never find. So somewhere amongst all that, there is looking for ways to traverse these emotions, to survive them, not to sink beneath them. Anyway, I digress again. So we've got Agnes arriving in Venice from Tasmania with her friend Michael. She sees this young boy, Todd. They all move in together into this tiny little cramped apartment, and they find that there's actually a way through to the Doge's palace, who ends up being her surgeon. So she gets to have her gender reassignment surgery, but then, of course, there's the tempest, the water rising. Todd and Michael are swept away. We don't think that they die. It's more like they are being swept away on Agnes's emotions. But what they have to hang on to is one of these balloon, clowns blow those balloon dog kind of things. They've got a giant one of those, which is buoyant. Now I'm giving away the whole thing. But what I thought when I was first started writing it, Todd was perhaps initially a bit of a fuddy-duddy. He was a bit of a fusty kind of academic who was always spouting these German phrases. And then I went to the Monash University Student Theatre, MUST, and there was this beautiful young man on stage, and I thought, oh, he could be Todd. I was struck, just as Gustav von Aschenbach was. And I thought, I want to get that actor for my play, which I hadn't written at that point. So sometimes you find a performer who acts as a muse, who helps you to write the work, because then the writing of it changed dramatically. There was this hot young gay boy who was, instead of who I thought Todd was going to be initially. But as I hadn't started, as I didn't even really have a first draft at that point, I didn't headhunt that actor at that point. But luckily we ran into each other later on. A few years ago, I had a production at La Mama of the 4 accordionists of the Apocalypse, which at the time I thought was going to be my magnum opus, but perhaps in retrospect it's more my juvenile, but we'll find out anyway later. But the idea for that play again was sparked by another work, not a work of, although it does come up in the Bible, it was inspired by a print of Albrecht Dürer, of the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse. And I thought, what if they all had accordions on them? And then that's how the idea for that play came about. So I might come later to talk about writing processes and tips for writing and getting through writer's block or things like that. But often ideas can be sparked in unusual ways, and they can be sparked by someone else's work. it might start out as a pastiche or something, but then get its own quality. So anyway, I had seen Alex Beyer performing at Monash Uni Theatre and had him in my mind as my muse for Todd. And I find it can help to have a muse for a work or for a character. And being on the hunt for a muse, it's like being on the trail of a muse is a bit like tracking down a new love or something. You feel a bit like a stalker trying to find out who they are, how to find them, stalking them on social media, which all led to nothing. But then, because I'd won an award for the 4 accordionists of the apocalypse, one of the things that I won was somehow going to these sessions at the Melbourne Theatre Company, and he was at one of those. So I met him, finally, and then wrote the play, or finished writing the play. The 4 accordionists of the apocalypse, from the time that I saw that work of Albrecht Dürer until that La Mama production, it was about 18 years, and I thought, I've got to speed up my production. I can't spend 18 years on each play. I've done other stuff in the meantime, but I thought I've got to write several plays at once, and I'll have ideas. Gradually I'll think, oh, the tone of that idea or phrase or snippet goes with that play or that character, and gradually they filter out. So I'm probably still writing kind of slowly, but writing several things at once. Anyway, why did I say that? Oh, because of the apocalypse. So anyway, I tracked down Alex, and I decided I was going to write Todd in Venice in 1 year. I thought, I'm going to write this play in 1 year. And I worked and wrote it all out and somehow got a draft together in a year. And it was selected for a workshop at Gasworks, which was a lot of fun. It was just a short version of it, which was basically the Doge's Palace scene, I think, and the final Tempest kind of scene. I wanted to write something just fast and fun, and of course it became more involved, but to capture a lot of that banter between friends of Agnes and Michael, and that spirit of, as I said, the Queen's Ball, the dressing up, the fun. And so I could then talk about, unless someone's got a question, nobody's got a question just yet. I could talk about then the inspiration for the character Michael. And he was inspired by this long-locked composer that I'd met in London, who was, yeah, again, fun-loving, very laconic. And I was impressed at how at ease he was with himself, and yet kind and interested in me as a weird blow-in Australian. People were getting sick of all the Australians coming in and sleeping on everyone's floors and working cheaply or whatever. But he was kind to me and fun, and so I just took his name and elements of his character. And then we all went up to Edinburgh for the Hogmanay for the New Year, and the sun came up at probably after 10, and it went down mid-afternoon. It went down pretty early. But these friends from London would stay up all night watching Star Trek and not wake up till 5 p.m. So I sort of used elements of all of that in this play, even though different bunch of people. I'm just wondering though, having mentioned the accordion, is it time to have a bit of music? Because it just breaks things up, and because, of course, playing accordion, I had to have some accordion music in a play set in Venice. So there's a character I haven't mentioned at all. Not the Doge, not Agnes, not Todd, not Michael. There's another character who is the sort of Doge's dog's body. He's a juggler. I went and hired for him one of those tacky kind of Pierrot clown costumes, and he was the musician in the play as well. So there's a scene where Agnes says, okay, let's get a gondola, even though they're 80 euros and we can't afford it. Let's just blow the money. And so the gondolier comes on, and of course it's Guido, this clown character. and his hat blows in the water, and Todd jumps in to save it, which is a mistake because, as mentioned before, the water's all stagnant, and that's what leads to Todd's illness and disorientation, as well as falling in love, of course. But anyway, while they're in the gondola, they have a little song from Guido. Oh, you might have noticed as well that we actually are in Venice. Here we go, Palazzo Ducale, the Doge's palace, just there. I'll say a bit more about that later. But I'm just behind this desk in the library, hoping I'm not going to knock over these devices. So this one you might have heard Pavarotti or somebody singing. Torna a Sorrento. Come back to Sorrento. Come neve sale, il giardino daranno un profumo uguale per chi palpita d'amore. E tu dici vado a Dio, allontanami col cuore, questa terra d'amore, hai la forza di lasciare. Ma non mi fuggire, non darmi più tormento, non accuriento, va bene, So that's what Guido sings in the gondola with Todd and Agnes. And this is when the transliteration of, I hope I've got the right word there, I think I do. It's like using phonemes where you're taking just the vowel and consonant sounds and making different words out of them, regardless of what the language is. So listening to this song, of course, Michael is, what does fame campar mean? It's just come back and make me a Campari. So part of this transliteration and using of phonemes is the attempts by Agnes and Michael, who are less literary than Todd. They don't speak all these languages and such, but they're trying to understand him, and they're trying to understand the culture and language of the place that they're in, but they're quite ignorant in that sense. They know they are. They're just tourists, just running around having fun and relaxing. But because they don't know much about the history as well, when they meet the Doge, the so-called Duke of Venice, they're very excited. They don't realise that the last Doge of Venice died in, when was it? 1756 or something. And so they just go along with it. They accept the idea that he's the Doge, whether in fact, who is this character who claims to be the Doge? Some non-Venetian water. And this is a mystery that doesn't really get solved. We don't exactly know who the Doge and Guido are. Are they just some clowns from the square who are dressing up? But if so, how does the Doge manage to carry off this gender reassignment surgery for Agnes? So anyway, that is a bit of a mysterious element in the play. At one point I was thinking, and maybe you do this if you're making a big blockbuster movie and you wanted it to be a bit more normal. At one point I was thinking, it's like the whole thing could almost be what Agnes is dreaming while she's anesthetized for her surgery. She could just dream this whole thing about Venice and the Doge and Todd. But in the play, they're real characters that interact. So that, I keep talking about the play, but now it's a book, and I'm here actually to talk about the actual book, which has a few points of difference. So I'm always submitting things to places, as writers do, and you hear about, oh, they've had that published and everything. You don't hear about all the rejections and all of those things. But finally, a publisher wanted to publish one of my plays, and it's quite unheard of in a way to have plays published, so that is great. And so I worked with the publisher, Howard Firkin, on how to make it work as a book that someone is reading. They don't have those accordions on stage or gondolas or any of those props. They can't see the characters. What can we do to help the reader? And even when I was writing the play, I found it helped at the beginning of scenes to write scenes such and such in which they meet the Doge or whatever. And so some of those little in which what happens in this scene turned into kind of chapter titles or scene titles in the printed version. But also in transforming Todd in Venice to the written page, printed page, yes, I had to think about what was needed to make up for what you couldn't see on stage. And I wanted to give some scene direction. So you had an idea of where the characters were coming on and off and what the stage would have looked like. But then at the same time, I wanted to maintain the illusion that we were in Venice and that we weren't in a theatre. So it's a fine line really between giving an idea, also giving an idea to someone who wanted to do their own production. It would be helpful to go, oh, they come on there, they go off the stage left, da, 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 da. But if you're reading it, you want to be transported to Venice. So I hope that it achieves that. And often I would think that I'd solved some of these little problems about how do the audience know this or that, and Howard Firkin, the publisher, would point out, oh, Guido, no one knows that he's there, or should they know, or should he actually say more? So I wrote extra bits for Guido to say, so he kind of introduces you to Venice when you arrive and leads the audience about like a tour guide. At the same time as working with Howard, and in case of emergency press, which is a pretty good name, isn't it? Press? I'm trying to point at it, but it's a mirror thing. At the same time as that, I was also working on an audio play version, so like a radio play version of it as well. And this was because of a grant through Creative Victoria, which was amazing last year to receive that grant for my writing. I think previously the most money I ever made out of writing was writing out invoices for the band. But anyway, so I received some funding to develop this one and another one, Untitled or The Seat of Narcissa, as radio plays. So then I was thinking about the opposite, thinking about how to make it into a book, is how to make it so when you hear it, you know what's going on. And you can't, well, you can rewind and listen to it again, but you, and you can have sound effects and so on to help. But it was a different way of thinking about it. But some of the things I came up with in making it into a radio play ended up being in this book as well. And that was also because I was working with an amazing dramaturg, Görkem Acaroglu, and some of her insights helped to clarify a few things. And to give Agnes, one of her points was, Agnes never really gets to fully celebrate the fact that she's now had her surgery and is a woman and all of those things. To celebrate that she has completed her, well, not totally completed, but that she's completed that part of her journey. And so there's a little bit more to celebrate that. So one of the things that I'm not quite sure if you're going to exactly find that from this, it's more something that you would have seen during the play, but when I was writing this, I always thought that, because Todd in the play, the young man, is quite an environmentalist, and he's always wondering about these rising water levels. Obviously, it's because of humans. The waters are rising. It's because of all the things, pollution and all these things, and global warming and such. But he's got another thought, which is, I've got to make a note because I've got another idea I'm waiting to tell you about. That I've got to tell you this other one first. He's got a notion that all these gondolas and all these boats in the water are also making the water level rise. Because if you've got the water and you keep putting things in it, there's less space. So in fact, I mean, not much would be displaced by a gondola, but if you imagine those huge cruise ships and things. So anyway, this is an idea that Todd has got, and he mentions Archimedes, and I haven't exactly found anyone else who's had the same idea about the boats as I have, but who knows? Maybe someone will set me straight or join me in this and back me up that there could be something in that. But Todd is an environmentalist, and I wanted to kind of highlight this, or what I wanted to do was to highlight some of these issues of pollution and water pollution and human destruction, I suppose. And so what I wanted to do, when we were in Venice, we saw these amazing old chandeliers. They were all these kind of twisted glass and everything, and they looked just a bit like twisted up, mangled plastic bottles or something, but they were very old and genuine. But I thought, I'm going to have a go at making one out of plastic bottles of different colours, which I did. And I collected all these bottles, every single one of them I found in the street. So for months I was collecting and rescuing and repurposing plastic bottles to make this chandelier, and to make what else did I make? The whole island of Murano in the stage production was just a bunch of plastic bottles. Anyway, I thought I would tell you that. I don't know. I'm just trying to remember whether we talk about them being in this version. Maybe you didn't need to know that everything was made out of plastic. Oh no, gaudy chandelier made from coloured plastic bottles. It is in here. So that's great. So another thing that happened when my partner and I, Alana, were in Venice in 2006. So that was the other thing. I went to university late last century, studied the German version, Der Tod in Venedig, at Thomas Mann's novella. And then we actually went to Venice in 2006. So that was another impetus for me to think, oh, that's right, I was going to write that thing about Venice. And some of the things that happened to us ended up in the play. And one of them, and it's hard to bring that out in theatre, I suppose, or in a book, but we just always had this feeling of being on uncertain ground. We got a 3-day Vaporetto pass. We couldn't afford the gondolas. And so we were always on the water going from A to B, and then we would just always felt like we were unbalanced. I know what else I was going to say about Alana was that she has always helped me make the props and sets for the plays. And this is one of them. So she chopped this out, put a nice little hinge so it could sit in the theatre, and then I painted it. And there are a bunch more. And in fact, as part of the crowdfunding, I sold some of them off. Sort of see that cutting. So my idea with this was, instead of having a giant set that the actors walk around in, was to have a miniature set that they stepped over and walked down under. And no, they didn't walk under it. When Agnes was crying on a bridge and Todd was telling her off because she was releasing more water into the environment by crying, she would hold the bridge up to her. Anyway, I'll put that back in the Brunswick Library carefully. Okay. So as it's getting close to 7:30, it could almost be time for a little bit more music, which would be a song that I wrote using the actual German text of Thomas Mann and making it into English, not translating it, but anglicizing it, and then setting it to music. So this can be another thing when you're writing, is to, and feel a bit blocked or whatever, is to try and make it into a little song. It may or may not help, but it's kind of fun. And if it is for theatre, then it's just provides a different mood. So Der Tod in Venedig starts with Gustav Aschenbach oder von Aschenbach. Oh, I'm actually really looking forward to seeing what the captioning does for this. See if it comes up with the same thing I did. Okay, so in Deutsch. Gustav Aschenbach oder von Aschenbach, wie seit seinem 50. Geburtstag amtlich sein Name lautete, hatte an einem Frühlingsnachmittag des Jahres 1900, das unserem Kontinent monatelang eine so gefahrdrohende Mühe zeigte, von seiner Wohnung in der Prinzregentenstraße zu München aus allein einen weiteren Spaziergang unternommen. So what happens with that? Gustav Aschenbach oder von Aschenbach. You've got Agnes in Venice buying these masks and things. Michael's helping her, so he's sort of her staff. And then Todd starts helping as well. So they're kind of working for her. They're kind of, how does Michael put it? I'm pulling on her purse strings, something like that. She's providing the money for them. So from Gustav Aschenbach oder von Aschenbach, because Michael is called Michael Bach and Todd is called Todd Ash. So they are Ash and Bach. So then we have good stuff, Ash and Bach. Oh, dear fond Ash and Bach. So you can see I'm taking this and then making it into English. And then what I did at the end of all of that was to go back through the play and sow the seeds so that it did add up. So what we have, if I can find, actually from, this is what it looks like during the production. It's all squibbly. It's not like neat like the actual book. So from Gustav Aschenbach oder von Aschenbach, I've got good stuff, Ash and Bach. Oh dear fond Ash and Bach. From wie seit seinem 50. Geburtstag, I've got Wiese, it's ice. Heines 20, 10 gay boys, tag and lick. And then I've got sein Name lautete, hatte an einem Frühlingsnachmittag des Jahres 1900. I've got sein name aloud. Because there's this thing about the names in this book too. Agnes, Todd asks Agnes what her name was before. And she says, Peter, you know, like they're changing their names. And they'd practice saying names aloud, sighing names aloud. So I'm kind of, these things that happen in the final speech of Agnes. Once you read the book, once you buy your own copy or borrow it from the Moreland Library, you can have fun looking at this final speech and then going back and finding all the little links. Anyway, I'm getting distracted again. So go far, drones to me now sigh, fond unending Prince Regents. Tresses sue, munching Australians. I envy their spa, because of course they go off to spa. Seer and gang unto no men. And there's a point in the play as well where I haven't told you the truth about Todd. Should I leave it? I shouldn't tell you everything, should I? Anyway, Todd is not so innocent as he seems. And Agnes and Todd both realize that they've met before. Anyway, Todd is, as I said, hanging onto Agnes's purse strings. They both are. And she says, I just want to pay you to be innocent. I don't want you to, anyway, I want to pay you to be innocent like the boy in the book. Because of course they're reading Death in Venice, of course. during the play. And why did I say that? Oh, yes, because we've got in this transliterated bit, knock to sell bent Agnes empathy. So she just wants empathy. She's selling it. Michael teases her because she wants to buy these Italian shoes, and he's teasing her because she needs a larger shoe size or a fuller shoe. So from this, anyway, we get, I now respect fuller shoe to devil today. And then at the end of Der Tod in Venedig, we get the news of Gustav von Aschenbach's death. Man brachte ihn auf sein Zimmer. Und noch desselben Tages empfing eine respektvoll erschütterte Welt die Nachricht von seinem Tode. So that also gets transliterated. Maybe what I'll do, rather than just telling you, because it's all in the song. So as long as I can manage to do that, you'll hear it again. And you'll see whether the captioning puts it up as German or English. So in the production, actually, it was played on mandolin. I thought that strumming, nice sound of mandolin. But of course, today we've got the accordion, just like on the flyer. Okay. Aschenbach, oh dear Freund Aschenbach. Wie sind's Eis, Hannes van Sings, den Gate tagelijk zijn name aloud. Perhaps tiny fooling snap, needs hide his eyes go insane. The unseen confidence, mighty lying. So go far, drones to me now sigh. Von Venedig his legions, Jesus and the two strings I am in a spa, and man bracket and half-time string, not to fill and Agnes empathy. I never wept for the shooting day. Next one side. To answer them without digressing too much. But as promised, I could talk a little about with the writing process, tips for writers and for theatrical performance writing. And I think that it is common for writers to get in a bit of a block. You've got ideas or you want to write something, and I don't know how it would be if you had deadlines. I have the luxury of living as a musician, so I have the freedom to write what I want to write and to my own deadlines. But I'm just going to find some pages where I wrote some really useful stuff and tips for writers. Well, you might want to ask someone who's more of a blockbuster bestseller, depending what your aims are in your writing. But if you were to ask me, which you haven't, but I'm going to tell you anyway, I've always found that, well, I love word games, and sometimes those can break me out of some kind of block. And this was totally the case last year because we were all in lockdown, and anything I was writing, I just seized up because it's like, what can be the outcome of these plays? What's going to happen? This seems so petty. I don't know what's happening next. And I already felt like that after the bushfires, let alone all the other lockdowns and all of those things. So instead, Oh, actually, that's what then made me go back and apply to do radio plays, in fact, because I thought, I don't know how to finish these plays. I know what I'll do. I'll go back to plays that I did finish before I felt so weird, and I'll make them into radio plays, try and publish them as books. That's how that came about. Anyway, let's move on, though, to these ideas of tips for writers and such. So if it helped, you could try some of these kind of word games, crosswords, Scrabble, pick it, because you end up with incongruous words that you wouldn't normally put together. There was a wonderful Scrabble game I had with a friend years ago, and we came up with things like nag vibes, vex frozen nomad, and there was one about selling iced over and eel over. And from that, I got this whole Inuit backstory for a character about this frozen nomad, and that was for the play The Anorexic Chef, which and perhaps the Inuit backstory complicated the whole thing. But anyway, it was a lot of fun to write. So these kind of word games could be something. And what was happening last year, I was breaking out of the block, but not in a big way. I would come up with literally, like I said, like 2 words, 1 sentence, half a sentence with no subject in it. But there was something. And then one day, I think almost a year ago exactly, it was in April sometime, I woke up at 5 a.m. or earlier because I could, because nothing was happening, and I would actually sometimes stay up all night watching Swiss dance videos and things because I could. And I just put these snippets together into a poem or something. But this is me living on these snippets. Perhaps not everyone can. Todd can, of course, in Todd in Venice. He's always writing on the back of envelopes because you've got less invested in it. It's just some scrap paper that you're writing on. But word games, Scrabble. And then if you do write something and you send it off, like I do with my poems, they're like pawns that I send to the slaughter. One friend of mine sent her lockdown poem. I think so many people have got lockdown poems, not just poets. She sent it off somewhere and it got rejected, and she was like, oh, it's got rejected. I just can't face anymore. And I thought, 1 rejection, wow. Usually I get 7 or 8 rejections before getting anything published, you know. And of course it's sad getting rejections or something, but I read somewhere that, what did I read? I can't even remember what I read, but what I got from it was that if you sort of monitor this kind of thing, I don't even know what I read or how to explain to you what I read, but I'll tell you what the outcome was. The outcome was that I did a whole Excel spreadsheet, which went literary magazines or whatever, poems, and another page for plays. And it would be like, okay, I've submitted that there, submitted that there. This also came about because I got a terse email from someone saying, we've already read this, send us something new or something. I can't send the same thing to the same people. So this is my advice. Get yourself an Excel spreadsheet and just accept the fact that you might get lots of knockbacks. And when I finally do get something published, I get a nice little gold star or whatever is the closest you can get, like an orange star in that column. So there's small little rewards there. It's kind of sad though. I have to think of how many crosses there are in that spreadsheet. But anyway, there are quite a lot of little gold stars as well. So does that help? I don't know if that helps you or not. But so that's to not get too deterred by being knocked back, because you just do. And in my email account, I just have a new folder called letters of rejection, you know. And then when I receive a letter of rejection, I email them back saying everything I've got on, you know. I say, oh, thanks for letting me know, hopefully another time. I look forward to the publication anyway, and here's what I've got on. I've got this great authors talk coming up at Moreland City Libraries, and, you know, tell them about that there is something happening. As far as writing for theatre, it's so great to have real humans to try to play with and to work with it on. That's what I love. And that's when it's been great to have some funding for plays, which I've had just a few times, which allowed me to hire actors to develop it. But if I can't, then sometimes what I do, and this might be something that you might want to try or not, is I interview myself and I interview the characters of the play and just see what they can. So I'll press record, and I've got a few alter egos, but I've got one who's Atlanta Peabody from Philadelphia. She's never stuck for words. She's a pretty good interviewer. She works for the Philadelphia World Review. And often she will interview Sofia and ask her about the play that she's writing. And sometimes I might reveal something that I didn't know. It's in there, but I didn't know how to access it. Or I'll interview the characters and find out more about them, characters I haven't finished writing. So I don't know if those sound like odd techniques, but they work for me in a way. And another thing, just keep applying for all of those things. What I find with the grant applications in particular, it's like, even if you get rejected, which you usually will, although the odds are still better than lotto, I think, the failed grant applications are also part of the development process, because you have a deadline, you create a budget, you start thinking about casting, you write a synopsis, you make a timeline, and so you're sort of putting the production into, well, not into motion, but you're planning it out, whether or not you get the funding to do it. So I've learned a lot about, that they've actually been a good part of the development, even when I haven't received funding. Putting the proposal together makes you think about your work and how to talk about it. We're just about at 7:45, and I had planned to end with that song that we just did a little while ago. So maybe that's that. And the people who asked the questions, or maybe they didn't ask them, but if they have, I'm happy to answer them. The other thing is, you can come back and watch this later and comment, and I can reply to the comments. I don't know whether I'll do it in video form but I don't know. I'll probably just type it in. But if that's it, then I'm going to thank Moreland City Libraries for having me, and thanks so much, Jessa, for your technical support, because I was going to be transmitting from my house and I couldn't get it together. Despite having done a lot of online concerts last year, there was something weird about the Facebook Live I couldn't do, and so Jessa has solved all of that, and it's quite fun to be in the Moreland City Library. Thank you all for coming along, those who have been here to see it live, and those future people who don't even know they're going to watch it yet. And thanks to the Moreland City Libraries for inviting me to present this talk as part of the Midsummer celebrations. Even though it's not summer, that is the festival that the play premiered in. And yeah, thanks for listening.